Really quick, everybody. This is our friend Mr. Howard Chaykin doing the page behind the paradigm, talking about the basic structure of the comics delivery system, which is the page. If you're here for that, you're in the right place. If you'd like to see
I love you, I'm going to the other one.
entrepreneurs, flexibility, fears, failure, and fun, that's right next door. So Howard Chaykin here, entrepreneurialism right next door. Thank you.
I would recommend the entrepreneurialism because what you're going to be getting from me is much more abstract, okay, and probably more fun, but less valuable. Who among you were here when I was here in September? Okay. Hi, nice to see you. You're looking good. You look reasonably healthy. You've been eating.
Yes.
You've been eating. Oh, I mean, look. As I said to someone earlier, no one I'm not married to ever has to see me naked again. So we're going to talk in a more abstract way about what comics are. By a show of hands, who of you make your living in comics as a writer and writer only? Okay. Who of you are cartoonists who do both? Thank you, Don. Who of you are artists who simply draw other people's work? Okay. Recently, this past Sunday, the New York Times in the book section, the New York Times has had a very sniffy relationship with comics for kids in tech history until recently, until somebody came up with this fucking graphic novel phrase, which makes it acceptable for the New York Times that technology exists in comics. In the book section, I read the paper digitally on weekdays, but I read the hard copy on Sunday because I'm old, I'm Jewish, and I'm originally from New York City. And the back page of the book review, maybe it was the entertainment section, was a comic strip drawn, credited to, a former film critic who decided to become a graphic novelist. The implication of this is anybody can do it. It's like Judy and Mickey putting on a show in the barn, which is appalling to me because I've spent 50 years at this. Okay. And here was this rank amateur piece of shit by a guy who didn't know that a ruler existed, didn't have any idea what a picture was, had no idea. I caught some of Stephen's thing, and I thought Stephen's talking about what I caught of Stephen was the semiotics of the image, to a great extent. This guy had no idea of images and pictures with narrative value. And it was just this utterly and completely amateurish approach to what we know as an actual valid and existent language. Okay. One of the reasons I feel this is imperative for me, going right back to a conversation I was having with the estimable Ty Templeton minutes ago. Stand up, Ty. Ty Templeton, ladies and gentlemen. A talent to be reckoned with, despite the fact that he's Canadian. Or maybe because of the fact he's Canadian.
And I have the shirt to prove
There you go. We had this conversation too. How talent is an almost non-existent idea. For me, I had no talent when I began. It was all about hunger and rage and a desperate need for attention. Okay? And this was my avenue to that. And what we're dealing with right now is what Tom Nichols calls the death of expertise. Okay? He's written a book about this, which I'm going to recommend you read, steal, get it on your Kindle, do something about it. It talks about the complete abolition of excellence, of virtuosity. Anecdotally, 30 years ago, I became my assistant became my writing partner. His name was John Francis Moore. We ended up writing television together. We worked a lot, and he was a very smart guy who burned out because he didn't understand what I was bringing to the table in the relationship. He wasn't a closer. Okay. And we were driving between meetings one day, and we were listening to what early hip hop. And I said, that's just somebody cutting tape and putting, that sampling stuff, that early sampling material. And he likened sampling to what Dexter Gordon did, when Dexter Gordon was a great jazz saxophone player, the connecting link between Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins and Charlie Parker, who was the first great Bach tenor saxophone player. he was notorious for interpolating quotations into his solos. Okay. And he said that that was the same thing. And I said, but this guy's using an X-Acto knife, and Dexter is composing on stage in the moment. And he said, yeah. And I said, that's virtuosity, that's technology. And he said, and I'm quoting, virtuosity no longer has context. And I just like, ooh. I was young. Yeah, I was 35, 30, not quite 40. And I've come to believe he was right. Unfortunately, to the detriment of the culture, but he was right. And that we are now working in a business in which I had breakfast with Cully Hamner this morning. Cully's one of my favorite people in the world. He's a phenomenally talented artist, a great technician, a great draftsman, and he reminded me of something I'd said to him 10 years ago, which was that his generation was the last generation with an acknowledgement, an acceptance, and an awareness of the existence of craft. That craft has ceased to have value. Okay. And it comes down to the difference between amateurism and ineptitude. Okay? Amateurism is a choice, ineptitude is imposed upon us. Okay? In the same way that stupidity is frequently an unwelcome gift, but ignorance is something that requires work to maintain. Okay? And we live in a culture and in a business in which ignorance is frequently identified as a gift. You know, that childlike need, okay? Which is actually just a code for infantilized junk, okay? All of us who work professionally in the comic book business, the mainstream comic book business, I think Stephen and for Time and for David, we work in a business where we are frequently called upon, Ivan, to do career maintenance material in the service of corporate superhero material. Okay. This is the result, this work, back it up. The Comics Code Authority in 1954 functionally infantilized comic books. It also infantilized the audience. And what it did was it drove away anybody who had any really interesting ideas about the use of the medium to other places. And they came back about 10 years later with the undergrounds, but only funny. Very few non-funny guys. Jack Jackson, Richard Corbin, who was excoriated by Bill Griffith endlessly. I wonder if they've ever met. I'd like to watch that. You know? And what's happened is we exist in a business right now, and I'm talking, again, everything I'm talking about now is mainstream comics. I'm not talking about ancillary, I'm not talking about graphic novels, I'm not talking about Alison Bechdel, I'm not talking about Persepolis. Those are works that exist in a plane of narcissism that escapes me completely. I don't get that work at all. I'm not interested in it. It doesn't, I mean, I like mainstream narrative. I like narrative that reflects what I like to read. And what's happened is that the language has ceased to be of value and has been replaced by the content. And I have no interest in the content. So what continues to intrigue me when I am forced by circumstance, which is to say a career move, to do mainstream superhero comic books, it is the language, the making of the material that holds value to me, not the content itself. Hearing grown men and women arguing about Batman disheartens me enormously. You can laugh all you like, but some of you had that argument, and some of you know a lot of people who have still having that argument. I don't give a fuck that Robert Pattinson is going to play Batman. It's just not that important, you know? And discussing their sex lives, the fact that these characters have sex lives now, demonstrates the utter vacuousness of the material. These are children's books, they're children's stories. They've been slathered with gravitas to make them acceptable to 50-year-old men who should be ashamed of their tastes. So we're going to talk about the language here. You know, those of you who were here last time, I did something called a paradigm, which is the 5 panels. And what I want to talk about is balance as opposed to symmetry. One of the things that I talked to Jim about was the idea that I loathe symmetry, I love balance. Okay? And it seems to me that, let's for the moment pretend these are all the same size. because that's what it's all about. Why are those panels the same size? When I did the Marvel seminar for 5, 6 straight years, half of the discussion was about why you choose to make the panels the same size, and why didn't you? And what do you tell the reader when you don't? What do you tell the reader when you do? There are 6 people involved in the making of a comic book. There's the editor, there's the writer, there's the artist, there's the colorist, there's the letterer, and there's the reader. Those of you who don't think about the reader are taking serious chances with your material. Okay? 4 panels, horizontal, on a page, the basic aspect ratio of comic books. 4 horizontal panels, always the same size, not just the same size to your loss. If you play with the size, you're editorializing with the language. You may choose to do this, but the reason you choose to do this has to be supported by the narrative. And I believe, I make my living as a writer and as an artist. I spent years working as nothing but a writer and some as an artist, but the job is one thing, it is one of synergy. I believe that the writer's responsibility is to create a problem, and the artist's responsibility is to solve that problem. I don't mean that sounds precious, it sounds cute, it sounds a little disdainful, but it is not intended to be so at all. Yes?
Would you mind repeating that? I'm sorry.
It's a great aphorism, isn't it? The writer's job is to create a problem, the artist's job is to solve that problem.
Thank you.
Okay? Does that make sense? Do you understand? Okay? Now, I use horizontal panels a lot because I'm a great believer in the ballad form. Okay? If you remember what I talked about last time, there are 3 storytelling. There's 3 approaches to storytelling. I'm a great believer in beauty. And I believe that the guy who basically invented the concept of comic book storytelling is Will Eisner. Okay? And what's most significant about that is that he was the one who was able to find a way to transliterate what was done in newspaper strips to the comic book aspect ratio, most successfully and most effectively. I didn't know this when I was a kid, because I didn't buy quality comics where all the good comics would be made. DC and Marvel were shit, but they were all bad knockoffs of Eisner. But significantly, when we talk about Eisner of that era, what we always talk about is his spirit splash pages. Okay? That's what we remember. That's where the beauty is. Because the pages themselves are fine, but for the most part they're mechanical. They're the mechanics of narrative. It isn't until Kurtzman comes along. Kurtzman is the guy who identifies this. Okay? He's the one who introduces a level of order. He's the one who realizes that the panels that the size of the panel dictates the action of the panel. Okay? The size of the panel dictates the amount of time involved in the action in that panel. Okay? Writers love the sound of their own words. They have pictures in their heads when they write comics. But the artist's job is to figure out a way to take the pictures that were in the writer's head and translate them to the pictures that are in their head. My job is not to illustrate a writer's script, a writer's vision. It has never been that way. Okay? The last job I did with anybody else of any volume was Satellite Sam. And Matt has referred to it as Howard Chaykin fan fiction. Because it feels and reads like something I would have done. I wouldn't have, but it does feel that way. None of those pages have anything directly relating to what the script said they should be. I told Matt's story, but I told it in a pattern that I identified. Okay? The horizontal shape, again, no more than 4, because 5 becomes a letter slot. I'm talking to writers here, I'm talking to artists as well. If you're doing 5 panels on a page, 5 horizontal panels, you're creating images that are just too narrow to create pictures in. Okay? This is almost the aspect ratio of a CinemaScope movie. Okay? When I did the seminars at Marvel, we also talked about this. Marvel has a profoundly conservative approach to layout. Can someone be timing me and let me know when I've got 5 minutes away? Can you handle that? Someone? Can you do that for me? And they really hate inset panels. They just hate them. And they hate them because they feel they're confusing. And I feel that they're enlightening. Because I feel that they're beautiful. Okay? Why don't you just cut the end off the panel? Because you're just cutting off the end of the panel. It's an arbitrary lopping. Okay? This is prettier than this. It is more beautiful. Okay? Beauty is, of course, subjective. Okay? Writers don't understand, to a profound degree, the job the artist has of finding beauty in the script. The organization. There are artists who depend on symmetry in the service of narrative, which bores the living fuck out of me. Okay? So, when you do this, what you've got here is this idea of a moment of time. But it's a graphic moment. Okay? It's like that. It has its own weight and space. I've also come to believe that this thing functions as a shape around and above what you've drawn here. Okay? Does this make sense? Questions? Anybody? I mean, you know. Now, what happens if we do this? What does that mean? It means you fucked up. Because you can't read from this to this without this. Okay? It's like that guy who needs to draw that figure bursting from the panel, but he's bursting from the panel, but there's something in front of him graphically that makes that completely nonsensical, and it subverts the desire. Whereas, this works just fine. Okay? I'm a serious jazz fan. And what brought me to jazz was my obsession with the American popular song, as you noticed from me at David started off. And I'm a great believer in the rhythm and structure of the American popular song. Now, and this informs a lot of the way I think about structure and narrative. The songs are stories. Now, back in the day, this was imposed on us. 6 equal-sized panels. Because the language of comics, the narrative of comics, still felt like it was clinging to newspaper strips and movies. Okay? Movie people, or as I know in my house, the people who used to beat us up for liking comics in high school and now making money off our asses, operate under the mistaken assumption that comic books are storyboards. They are not storyboards. They are not plastic. They are static. They are not kinetic. They are still and inert. Okay? They have the bombast of comics is in the energy of the drama. As I've gotten older, I've become less and less interested in that energy, that bombast. I'm much more interested in the abstract. Let me check my notes to see what I'm talking about.
Luckily, my phone rang while you checked your notes.
Anybody know?
No one I want to know.
Got rid of them? Not one of my wives, right?
They just tell you it's spam now.
What's that?
They tell you it's spam now. It's easier.
I know, isn't that fucked up? So, as I say, Eisner invents it. But Kurtzman makes it a language. Kurtzman is the one who takes that and gives it vocabulary. Okay? And I'm not talking about late Kurtzman. I'm not talking about humbug. I'm not talking about Trump. I'm not talking about Little Annie Fanny, for Christ's sake. That stuff is, for the most part, puerile junk. I'm talking rather about the war books, Frontline Combat and Two-Fisted Tales, and Mad. Mad the comic book. Okay? Looking at this work, you realize you're in the hands of someone who has thought about what he's doing. There is no spontaneity to it. And for those of you who worship spontaneity, good on you, not me. I like organization, structure, and balance. And what Kurtzman did was he took what I did and he makes it clear that these panels should all be the same size because they have the same narrative value. There's a brilliant story he did that he wrote and drew called Rubble. You know this?
I thought you were going to say Corpse on the Engine.
Nah, but Rubble is actually a better story.
My favorite is Corpse.
Look, I love If,
Yeah.
I love If, and I love Corpse on the Engine, but Rubble is the story that I use to explain what Kurtzman is thinking about and how he's doing it. Remember the story?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I make my students read Corpse on the Engine. I won't even talk to them until they read it.
I don't talk to them anyway. But Rubble is basically about a Korean family building a house. Okay, what it is, it's those 4 horizontal panels. Okay, every page, and it's relentless. And because it uses this kind of this static narrative, you know shit's coming. Okay. And when you get to the conclusion of the story, and I'll leave it to you to read the story, you realize you're in the hands of someone who has controlled your point of view. Okay? As a writer, as an artist, your job is to control your reader's point of view. Because the reader is the mechanical engine of what you've delivered. Okay? He's there for you. Okay? And you've got to find language visually. And not textually, but visually, that does not confuse or confound in a way that distract from the narrative. You know, people, I mean, we are in a culture right now where the writer is the alpha in comics, and there are a number of reasons for that, which are more hostile than I want to get into. But a lot of them relate to the fact that writers are smarter than artists in many ways, and that they recognize the fact that if they behave like professional adults, they can probably supersede artists who feel that they're putting one over on the man by behaving like idiots. You know, I'm serious. I'm quite serious. Artists in comics tend to be, be victims of arrested development. You know, not indicted, but definitely arrested. and they allow themselves to be manipulated by writers when if they simply step up to the plate and recognize the fact that they had a career to serve and a discipline to address, they wouldn't be on the receiving end of being screamed at by writers. You know? I'm a smart guy. You know, I recognized early on in my career that the guys that I was working for, writers, were taking advantage of me by the fact that I really wanted a plot. And I was doing plots and everything else and doing everything but the dialogue and not getting paid a dime. And most of these guys' credentials, certainly in my generation, the guys who were writers in comics in my generation, in that early wave, were basically guys who had failed as artists. This does not strike me as credential. You'll notice there's a pattern. Never more than 4. The aspect ratio of the comic book page is a defined space. It's 2 to 3. Okay? If you go to 5, you're going to be doing basically keyholes. And they may work if you have a choice that makes that work. Okay? But 4. And what do you achieve with 4 verticals? You achieve height. And you achieve a kind of odd, almost phallic vertical space. Okay? And what happens if
Equally vaginal is phallic.
it's a boys' room? Cheap shit. I'm in front of you guys and you're sitting down. But you can also play with this. Okay? How do you make the reader see this when at the same time supporting the clarity the writer asks of you as an artist? Okay? These are variables on various visual themes. Okay? It's important to also know that this amount of space has narrative value. The narrative value in this space is solely based on the expression in a face. You cannot ask an inset to do the work of a full-size panel, no matter how big that inset is. Simply by its presence overlapping other images, it is. Those entrepreneurs are having the best fucking time. They've just figured out how to rape and rob and pillage. And they're working on that now on lying.
Exploitation is fun.
Pardon me?
Exploitation is fun.
Hey, you know, I was born in 1950. I grew up exploited. And again, I have to keep emphasizing that the beauty is a completely subjective idea. Okay, but it is the cartoonist's job, the artist's job, the guy who draws a comic book page to make it beautiful. You know, I'm looking at Ty. Okay, and Ty is a guy who draws in no way resembling the way I think visually. Okay, Ty's picture making is so rife with narrative value that I know what's going on by dint of character, acting, body language, facial expression, everything. But we are literally losing that craft, that obsession with those details as we become less and less interested in the fact of the language that we work in. Anecdotally, I think I mentioned this last time I saw you guys. I was at a panel at a convention on a panel some years back, and these guys told me about this book they'd done. And the concept sounded fabulous. It really did. And I bought the trade, 5 issues. In the trade, in 5 issues, none of the characters looked at each other. The pages themselves were laid out in such a way that there wasn't a single, there was no reason why this panel was this size, why there was an arbitrariness to its non-organization. And most significantly, in 5 issues, there was not a single subjective image where any character identified the presence of the reader. The identification with the reader is, for me, a biological imperative of what I do. Okay? Not a writer's choice, but an artist's choice. Okay? And I'm not talking about that bullshit Deadpool crap. You know, that like breaking the fourth wall because it's fun. No, it's not fun. It's just stupid. I'm talking about literally identifying the existence of a fifth or sixth party out there who is part of the experience. He's turning the page for you. Acknowledge his existence.
I know what you mean by that because I was here last time. I guess I've read your work for decades. Could you just explain that nuts and bolts wise for somebody who's here the first time?
Say again, I'm sorry.
What you mean by acknowledging the existence of the reader? You drew it last time, which made it
Well,
clear for everybody.
I just as a literally subjective view of an image, preferably an inset, certainly a close-up, not a figure, but a face, a head, a shot, that literally looks at the reader's eyes, that the reader knows is looking at him. Because he's a conspirator in your work. Okay? You're the only writer, professional writer in the room as far as I can tell, correct?
And that's arguable.
Oh, David, I'm sorry. I just think of you as my Ferranti to my Teicher. You know? So, and I had a point. Find it. Oh, God.
Reader acknowledgement, subjective view.
Looking back.
No, it's lost. It's gone. Don't get to be 69, kids. It's okay. Too often, I find that writers regard letterers as a delivery system for text, and solely that. Okay? Which ignores the graphic, the zeitgeist, the gestalt of the entire experience. Okay? A smart writer is someone who knows how to get the work out of an artist and the letterer. I mean, my editor, I work at a predominantly an image. One of Ken's committed skill sets is making everybody's life a living hell. I've known this guy since I'm 21. We are twin sons of different mothers. We are both raving pains in the ass, but I get away with it because I'm charming. Ken has no charm. And he is just, he's a ball breaker. And he's also the best fucking guy in the business. And I keep telling Thomas, my editor, that you're putting up with this because he's the best there is. Anybody else would make your life just as miserable in entirely and profoundly different ways. But it would be also in tandem with ineptitude. Okay? So, I take very seriously the job that everybody does on the job. Everybody. You know? If I work from someone else's script, you know, I'm not there to rewrite that script. I'm there to take the problems created by that script and bring my skill set to serve the solution. Does any of this make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I know I'm being abstract, and I recognize the fact that I'm not being, you know, nuts and bolts-ish. But this is how I think about the work every morning. Okay, the whys. Okay. Kurtzman. Okay? Now, the problem with a lot of these layouts is that it doesn't serve bombast. Okay? It serves narrative. I noticed somebody on Facebook today asked, has there ever been a comic book told exclusively with splash pages? And I said, yeah, in the 90s. You know, I mean, one of the reasons why comic writers are the alpha is because comics in the 90s were so shitty. They were just so utterly devoid of narrative content. They existed solely, they were the ultimate fan service. They were the equivalent of guys who should have been making their livings painting wizards on the sides of vans doing comic books. And they had contempt for narrative. They were all about sensibility. And I like sensibility more than anything else because I like porn, I like adventure stuff, you know. I like extremely violent movies. So does my wife, who's a tiny little bitch. You'd never guess we'd go for that. We both love incredibly violent shit. Reprisal on Hulu. Ooh. See it?
That's great.
Right?
That's one of the best I've seen.
No, have you seen this?
I've not.
Currently the best comic book show on television that's not a comic book.
Right.
It's great. Abigail
From
Spencer.
the first second to the last, production
Absolutely
design,
right.
the cinematography, everything.
It's just, it takes place, I forget who said this. Oh, Tommy Lee Edwards.
Oh, nice.
I said it takes place in the same universe as Easy Streets. Remember Easy
Yeah.
Streets? Okay. He said, no, it's Streets of Fire. and he's right.
That's a recommendation.
It's fucking great.
Oh, good.
And I love this stuff. And I like drawing in your face stuff. I like writing in your face stuff. I'm going to take this stuff and move beyond it. But I also use this stuff in every book I do. There's always a page that looks like this. Okay? Because you've got to have a page to 5 pages that are about the narrative. And I'm not talking about characters talking to each other. I'm talking about event following event following event. When you don't bother with making sure those panels are the same size, you are editorializing unintentionally with your reader. Okay, you guys, talk to the guys who draw your stuff. Their job is not to illustrate your text. Their job is to take your stuff and give it narrative value visually. Talk about the whys and wherefores of why these panels are the same size. The debt that Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons owe to Kurtzman is only occasionally acknowledged and then forgotten, because history is based on amnesia. I'm really close, and by the way, I had cataract surgery about 3 weeks ago, and I'm really fucked up visually right now. That's why I'm wearing these stupid-ass readers. Driving down from Ventura this afternoon was an epic adventure. As far as I know, I killed no one. But there are some chickens. 9 panels. A simple grid. Okay? That's what David Allen did. Okay? It's also what Kurtzman did. Okay? And it works. But it works only if you're working with an artist who can accommodate finding a way to make a picture that small. You have no idea how difficult it is for most contemporary talent to think that way. It's why they frequently retreat to headshots. Okay? That thing I mentioned out front, that comic strip by this amateur, demonstrated the fact of a complete and total misunderstanding of what we do. It's not just a bunch of pictures on a page and then it's over, okay? There's rhythm, there's flow, there's organization, there's shape, okay? One of the reasons I say that you need to do a headshot or a close-up or an inset is that frequently you'll find writers asking an artist to provide more, asking too much of a space, okay? I know you've done small panel work, you've done multiple panel grid work, you know, and you can see a guy like David Aha doing it. But I don't think you can get that kind of work of any quality out of a guy like Frank Cho. I just don't see it.
Paul Beatty wrote a script that I'm working on right now that averages 9 panels a page.
Does it work?
It's a good script.
Okay.
I'm not giving him 9 panels a page.
What are you getting? What are you getting?
About 6.
Okay. How are you doing that?
I'm finding ways of
Right.
solving the narrative
Right.
inside of 1 panel.
Is he right about his 9 panels?
No,
Okay. And you know this because?
because I'm a good writer too.
There you go. Aha! And that's what I'm going to say to the guys in this room who are drawing comics right now. How much time do I have?
You have 8 minutes.
Good. Now I'm going to talk to the guys who do nothing but draw. It's time for you guys to start reading. It's time for you guys to start to learn how to write. Because you're doing the writing whether you know it or not. If you're bringing your game to the work of being a comic book artist, you are participating in the writing. Writing in comics is a completely collaborative function. It is solutions provided by artists, and an artist's job in comics uses illustrative technique to create pictures of narrative value. All right? The 2 things I want you to take home with you to read, and we'll open to questions in a second, is I want you to take a look at Tom Nichols' book, The Death of Expertise. I cannot recommend it highly enough. It will depress the living fuck out of you. And get to a Barnes & Noble or any large bookstore chain that's got a performing arts section, and read Stephen Sondheim's, the introduction to Stephen Sondheim's first book of lyrics. It's called Finishing the Hat. It's a reference to a musical called Sunday in the Park with George. The introduction to that, I have both volumes. I have Finishing the Hat and Look at Me Hat, because I'm a musical comedy queen from way back. The introduction to Finishing the Hat is the single most perfect example of an exegesis of the professional experience I have ever read in my life, both individual and collaborative. I wouldn't recommend you buy the book unless you're a sign-up more, because I'm a sign-up. But read the book at Barnes & Noble. Read that introduction. It will kill you. It is astonishing. It's venal, it's petty, it's small-minded, it's hostile, but it's true and it's real. It's just brilliant. It really is. When I found out that one of his first jobs was as a staff writer on Topper, I love this man even more. Right. And,
What the hell?
I mean, when I read this, I did my impression of Leo G. Carroll for my wife with no context whatsoever. If you're really good, I'll do my impression of Leo G. Carroll. You ready? Who remembers the Cosmo? Remembers Topper, the television series? Okay.
The old guys.
Yeah. George, man, George. That's right? Come on, let's go. All right. Questions? Anyone? Come on. Baby. Oh, good. Oh my, what you got?
So, you talk a lot about panel spacing and what that. How would you say to, as a writer, how would you say to your artist how to lay the panels out without coming off? Well, how would you say it had to do it? I would just leave it open-ended.
I think it's a reasonable question. It's hard.
Would you say put this one on top of it just space? Would you say?
I mean, I always you know, I always suggest think about it or consider, okay? My scripts are all size-based, okay? It's like across the page in width, 1/4 of the page in height, okay? And I'm very specific about that because I think that's one of the writer's responsibilities, to define the amount of size, the size involved in the picture involved, okay? And there are artists who, unlike me, love hearing the question, what do you feel like drawing? If a writer asks me what I feel like drawing, I realize that they're lazy-ass motherfuckers who don't really care about the work they're doing. They're just willing to just like take a paycheck. Feeling like drawing something is what I do when I'm on my own. My job is to make comic books. And I don't feel like drawing anything. What I feel like doing is making a living sitting on my fat ass testing macaroni and cheese. My job is to make comic books. It has nothing to do with what I feel like drawing. I'm interested in being challenged by the work that I do. I've been doing this for 50 years. And I sucked for the first time. But the reality is, I got good because I learned how to be good. When I write a script, when I write and draw my own stuff, my scripts are full scripts. Because I don't deliver pencils. I'm a brand, okay? I am who I am, and if someone hires me to do a job, and they're surprised by what I delivered, they don't know who I am. I just did an introduction to the Steranko Shield book, and they were appalled by what I wrote. And I let them edit me, as I knew they would. But I stand by what I wrote, and I'll publish the original version after he dies. What do you got? I'm done. You have a question? You're not waiting your time? Oh, God!
Sorry,
Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt. I do.
You don't mean to interrupt. You're in a comic book convention.
I do have a question. I'm hoping to break into comic editing. You as an experienced author, clearly as an experienced with art.
I've done this for a living, you know?
Yes. What do you recommend, or what do you think makes good comic editors?
I think you have to set some idea of at least 50% of what's being done by the artists, because for the most part, right now we're in a culture where the editorial department of both Marvel and DC, the two largest companies, there is not a single artist working on the company, not in either company. You can point at Quesada, you can point at Jim Lee, but they're not involved in the day-to-day affair of editing. And most editors have absolutely no clue how to criticize the material from a visual perspective at all. Okay, they are completely and totally in the writer's pocket. The best thing you can do is to literally get all the stuff. Read the McCloud books, as simplistic and as dogmatic as it is. He's worth reading in that regard. Read the 5 C's, which is a book about cinematography, which will help some. Comics are the last place where people are actually doing deep focus imagery. Movie makers and television only use deep focus. Okay, Ben Schwartz posted a shot from Hitchcock pictures that nobody's doing this anymore. And I pointed out, I do all the time. Okay, learn that. Find an artist whose work you deeply respect. Befriend them, and see what it is about the work they do visually. And I'm not talking about pretty shit. You know, pretty is bullshit. You know, it's just nonsense. We have time for one more,
You actually answered it on that second part,
which
is when you're not an artist, how to learn language to be able to.
it's, you know, too many writers regard artists as delivery systems for their inspiration, and it's just nonsense. Writers should learn at least the rudimentary essence of being able to tell story with pictures, and artists should learn to at least be able to put together a narrative in some text. Writing clearly is an aspect of modern culture which has vanished. And I would really recommend some of you think about writing clearly. No more, don't write like it's a text. Write emails like it's a letter. No matter how many people make fun of you for doing this, because it's so old school. Well, unfortunately, yeah. But old school is good school. Anybody else? One more, last. Yes, sir. Omar.
So, would you say that the importance, you mentioned earlier that the importance in the size of the image reflects how long the image is going for?
Yes, the amount of time involved in that.
Would you say that for an establishing shot it would be equal to the importance of something else?
When I've seen people use insets for establishing shots, it's a complete misunderstanding of what the language is. An establishing shot, in most cases, most successfully, is between a quarter or a third horizontal panel. Because establishments are, generally speaking, landscapes. Okay? If you're using a vertical for an establishing shot, it better be a fucking skyscraper. Thank you. You guys have worked